You know what's wild? There are secrets so big, so world-changing, that the people who kept them couldn't even tell their own families. Not for years, not for decades. Some took them to their graves. I'm talking about the Manhattan Project, and today I'm going to tell you what it was really like to be there, to work on something that would end a war, reshape global politics, and haunt the conscience of everyone involved. Because here's the thing most people don't understand. The scientists and engineers who built the atomic bomb weren't movie villains. They were regular people. Brilliant, yes, but also scared, excited, conflicted, and completely unaware of just how much they were about to change human history. By the end of this video, you're going to understand what it felt like to wake up every morning in a secret city that didn't exist on any map. You'll know what it was like to solve impossible physics problems while your friend's husband was dying on a battlefield in Europe. And you'll understand why, 70 years later, some of us still can't decide if what we did was right. So stick around. Because this isn't just history. This is the story of how ordinary people built the most extraordinary and terrifying weapon the world has ever known. Let's dive in. It started with a letter. Not for me personally, but that's how the whole thing began. August 2nd, 1939. Albert Einstein signed a letter to President Franklin Roosevelt. The letter warned that Nazi Germany might be developing atomic weapons. Think about that for a second. Einstein, the most famous scientist in the world, writing to the president to say, hey, Hitler might be building a bomb that could destroy entire cities. Roosevelt read it, and 3 years later, in 1942, the Manhattan Project was born. Now, I didn't know any of this when I got my letter. Mine came in early 1943. It was vague, suspiciously vague. It said I'd been selected for important war work, top secret. Couldn't tell me where, couldn't tell me what. Just that my country needed me. I was 26 years old. I had a degree in physics from Berkeley, and honestly, I was honored, excited. This was my chance to contribute to the war effort, to do something that mattered. My wife was less thrilled. They won't even tell you where you're going. No. Or what you'll be doing. No. For how long? They don't know. She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. But here's what you have to understand. In 1943, everyone was contributing to the war effort. Your neighbor was rationing sugar. Your cousin was fighting in North Africa. Your sister was building airplanes in a factory. This was my way to help. So I said yes. I packed a single suitcase. I kissed my wife goodbye at the train station, and I boarded a train heading west with absolutely no idea where I was going or what I was about to become part of. The secrecy started immediately. The train ride took 3 days. 3 days of staring out the window, watching America roll by, and having absolutely no clue where I'd end up. We weren't allowed to talk about where we were going. We weren't allowed to ask each other questions. There were about 40 of us in that car, all roughly my age, and we barely spoke. You could feel the weight of it, the secrecy, the importance. Whatever we were traveling toward, it was big. We passed through Kansas, then Colorado. The landscape got more desolate, more beautiful too. Mountains appeared on the horizon, snow-capped and massive. Finally, we arrived in Lamy, New Mexico. Now, if you've never been to New Mexico, let me paint you a picture. It's high desert, endless sky, mesas that look like they belong on Mars. In 1943, it felt like the edge of the world. We were loaded onto army trucks. No explanation, just get in. And then we drove. Up a winding mountain road, through canyons, past ancient pueblos. The trucks kicked up dust that got in your eyes, your mouth, your lungs. After 2 hours of this, we started seeing fences, guard towers, soldiers with rifles. That's when it hit me. Wherever we were going, we weren't leaving anytime soon. The truck pulled through a gate, and there it was. Los Alamos. Except it wasn't called Los Alamos. Not officially. It was Site Y, or the hill. Or sometimes just that place in New Mexico that doesn't exist. Because according to every map, every document, every piece of official correspondence, we weren't there. The town didn't exist. Our work didn't exist. We didn't exist. Welcome to the most secret place in America. Let me tell you what Los Alamos looked like in 1943. Imagine a hastily constructed town clinging to a mesa 7,000 feet above sea level. Unpaved roads, wooden barracks, a single movie theater, one tiny general store. Everything covered in a fine layer of desert dust that never, ever went away. It was beautiful and miserable in equal measure. The views, incredible. You could see mountains in every direction. The sky was so clear at night that the Milky Way looked close enough to touch. The living conditions? Not so incredible. I shared a room in a dormitory with 3 other guys. The walls were so thin you could hear everything. The heating barely worked. In winter, it got down to 10 degrees. In summer, the sun baked everything to dust. But here's the crazy part. Nobody complained, because within a day of arriving, we understood what we were doing there. Not the details. Not yet. But the big picture. We were building a bomb. An atomic bomb. A weapon so powerful it would make every other weapon in human history look like a firecracker. And we were racing against Nazi Germany to do it first. The orientation was brief. A general stood in front of about 200 of us and said, essentially, "You're here to end the war. Everything you do is classified. You can't tell anyone anything, not your families, not your friends, not even each other, unless you're working on the same project. Security is absolute. Questions?" Nobody had questions, or if they did, they were too overwhelmed to ask. After orientation, we got our assignments. I was placed in the theoretical division. My job? To help calculate the critical mass of uranium-235. Now, if you don't know what critical mass means, here's the simple version. It's the amount of fissile material you need to sustain a nuclear chain reaction. Too little, and nothing happens. The right amount, and you get an explosion that releases more energy than anything humanity has ever created. No pressure, right? The work began immediately. Here's what people don't understand about the Manhattan Project. It wasn't one project. It was dozens, hundreds even. You had people enriching uranium in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. You had people producing plutonium in Hanford, Washington. You had people here at Los Alamos designing the actual bomb. And within Los Alamos, you had divisions: theoretical physics, experimental physics, chemistry, metallurgy, ordnance. Each division was working on a different piece of the puzzle. My division, theoretical, was run by Hans Bethe. Brilliant guy, German-born, Jewish, escaped the Nazis. He had this way of explaining complex physics that made you feel smart even when you were drowning in equations. Our days started early, 7 a.m. Sometimes earlier. We'd gather in the tech area, which was the secure section where all the real work happened. Armed guards everywhere, badges required. If you forgot your badge, you didn't get in. Didn't matter who you were. The work itself was intense. We were essentially inventing nuclear physics as we went along. Yes, we had theory, lots of theory. But nobody had ever built a nuclear weapon before. Nobody knew if it would even work. We spent hours doing calculations, by hand, with slide rules and mechanical calculators. Imagine trying to model a nuclear explosion using equipment that's less powerful than the calculator on your phone. That was our reality, and the pressure was constant. Because we knew that somewhere in Germany, scientists were probably doing the exact same work. We knew that if they got there first, if Hitler got an atomic bomb before we did, the war was over. The world was over. That knowledge sat in your chest like a weight you couldn't shake. But here's the thing. Despite the pressure, despite the fear, there was also excitement. Wonder, even. We were pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. We were seeing things nobody had ever seen before, calculating things nobody had ever calculated. Every day brought new discoveries, new problems, new solutions. It was exhausting and exhilarating. And then there were the people. The Manhattan Project brought together the greatest collection of scientific talent in human history. I'm not exaggerating. The sheer concentration of genius at Los Alamos was absurd. You had J. Robert Oppenheimer running the whole show. Oppenheimer was the scientific director. Thin, charismatic, brilliant, chain-smoked like his life depended on it. He could quote Hindu scriptures and explain quantum mechanics with equal ease. Everyone called him Oppie. You had Enrico Fermi, who'd already built the first nuclear reactor in Chicago. Fermi was Italian, charming, had this ability to simplify incredibly complex problems. You had Richard Feynman, who was only 25 at the time. Feynman was a prankster. He'd pick locks for fun, crack safes, drive the security officers crazy. But he was also one of the sharpest minds there. You had Niels Bohr, the Danish physicist who'd won the Nobel Prize. The Nazis had tried to capture him. He escaped to London, then came to Los Alamos under the fake name Nicholas Baker. Everyone knew who he really was, but we all pretended we didn't. And then there were women. Lots of women. See, the Manhattan Project needed computers, not electronic computers, those didn't really exist yet. Human computers. People who could do complex calculations quickly and accurately. Hundreds of women were hired for this work. Many had degrees in mathematics or physics. They weren't just assistants or secretaries, they were doing real scientific work. Critical work. But here's the messed up part. Many of them had no idea what they were calculating. They'd be given equations, told to solve them, and never told why or what the numbers meant. Security compartmentalization taken to an extreme. Despite the secrecy, or maybe because of it, a strange community formed. We'd have parties on weekends, square dances, picnics. People got married, had babies. There were kids running around this secret city, playing in the dust, completely unaware that their parents were building the most dangerous weapon in history. There was a weird normalcy to it all. Except nothing was normal. How could it be? The secrecy was maddening. They called it compartmentalization. The idea was simple. You only knew what you absolutely needed to know to do your job. Nothing more. So the guy enriching uranium in Oak Ridge, he had no idea what it was for. He just knew he had to separate U-235 from U-238. The woman calculating compression ratios. She had no idea those numbers would determine whether the bomb would fizzle or explode. Even within Los Alamos, information was siloed. I knew what my division was working on. I didn't know what the division next door was doing. And if I asked, I'd get shut down immediately. That's not your concern. Need-to-know basis. Stop asking questions. It drove some people crazy. There's a famous story about Richard Feynman getting frustrated with this. He was trying to solve a problem and needed information from another division. They wouldn't tell him. So he started breaking into filing cabinets and safes just to get the information he needed to do his job. The security officers were furious. But what could they do? He was right. The compartmentalization was making the work harder. Eventually, Oppenheimer loosened things up a bit. He encouraged more communication between divisions, more collaboration. He understood that good science requires sharing ideas, but the fundamental secrecy remained. We couldn't tell our families what we were doing. We couldn't tell our friends. Letters were censored. Phone calls were monitored. My wife wrote to me asking what I was working on. I wrote back, "Important war work, I can't say more." She wrote asking when I'd come home. I wrote back, "I don't know." After a while, her letters got shorter, more distant. I could feel our marriage fraying at the edges, held together only by the promise that all this would eventually end. But when? By late 1944, we'd made real progress. The calculations were getting clearer. The designs were coming together. We were getting close. Close to what, exactly? Close to testing the gadget. That's what we called it. The gadget. Never the bomb. Never the weapon. Those words felt too real, too heavy. The gadget sounded almost innocent. Like a toy. But there was nothing innocent about it. Two different designs were being developed simultaneously. The first was called Little Boy. It used uranium-235 and worked on a simple principle: shoot one piece of uranium at another piece. When they combine, boom. Instant critical mass. This design was so straightforward that we didn't even need to test it. If we got the math right, it would work. The second was called Fat Man. This one used plutonium-239 and was way more complicated. You couldn't just shoot plutonium at itself because it would pre-detonate, fizzle out before reaching full explosion. Instead, Fat Man used implosion. Imagine a ball of plutonium surrounded by conventional explosives. You detonate those explosives simultaneously, perfectly synchronized, and they compress the plutonium inward. That compression makes it supercritical. Chain reaction. Nuclear explosion. Getting the timing right was nearly impossible. We're talking about detonating 40-some explosive lenses at exactly the same microsecond. One lens goes off early or late, and the whole thing fails. This is where my work came in. Calculating precisely how much compression was needed. How fast, how uniform. Run the numbers wrong, and you either get a fizzle or you accidentally vaporize yourself during assembly. The pressure was unreal. And then, in April 1945, everything changed. President Roosevelt died. I remember hearing the news. It spread through Los Alamos like wildfire. People were crying. Roosevelt had been president since 1933. He'd led us through the Depression, through the war. He was the only president many of us had ever really known. And now, he was gone. Harry Truman became president. Here's the thing. Truman didn't know about the Manhattan Project. Roosevelt had kept it secret, even from his own vice president. So Truman became president and had to be briefed on this massive, expensive, secret program to build atomic bombs. Imagine that conversation. Mr. President, we've spent $2 billion building a weapon that can destroy entire cities. You've spent how much? But Truman didn't shut it down. He gave the order to continue. Then, in May, Germany surrendered. VE Day, Victory in Europe, May 8th, 1945. The war in Europe was over. Hitler was dead. Germany was defeated. You'd think we'd celebrate. We did, sort of. There was a party. People drank, danced. But the mood was weird, complicated. Because here's what started sinking in. We'd been racing to beat Germany to the bomb. That was the whole point. Stop Hitler from getting atomic weapons. But Germany was done. They'd never even come close to building a bomb. So why were we still working? That question started circulating. Quietly at first, then more openly. Some scientists wanted to stop. They argued that the original mission was complete. Germany was defeated. There was no existential threat anymore. Others argued we should continue. Japan was still fighting. American soldiers were still dying. If the bomb could end the war faster, save American lives, wasn't that worth it? The debate got heated. Niels Bohr was particularly concerned. He argued that we should share nuclear knowledge with other nations, including the Soviet Union, to prevent an arms race. He actually tried to meet with Roosevelt about it before the president died. But the majority view was, finish what we started. Test the gadget. See if it works. Then worry about what comes next. So we kept working. And the test date was set, July 16th, 1945. Location: White Sands, New Mexico. Middle of the desert. About 200 miles south of Los Alamos. The test site was codenamed Trinity. Why Trinity? Oppenheimer chose the name. He never explained it fully, but he'd been reading a lot of John Donne poetry at the time. One poem has the line, "Batter my heart, three-personed God." Make of that what you will. We had 2 months to prepare. The weeks leading up to Trinity were the most intense of my life. Everything we'd calculated, everything we'd designed, was about to be tested for real. Would it work? Would the explosion be what we predicted? Bigger, smaller? Would it fizzle? Would it ignite the atmosphere and destroy all life on Earth? Oh yeah, that was the thing we worried about. Some scientists, not many but some, theorized that a nuclear explosion might trigger a chain reaction in the nitrogen in Earth's atmosphere. Basically, the whole planet could catch fire. We ran the calculations. Multiple times. Different approaches. The consensus was, no, that won't happen. But the consensus wasn't unanimous. Imagine being part of a project where there's even a 1 in a million chance you might accidentally destroy all life on Earth. How do you sleep at night? You don't. Not well, anyway. As the test date approached, equipment was moved to Trinity site. The gadget itself was assembled there. Fat Man's core, the plutonium sphere, was driven down from Los Alamos in a special vehicle. Think about that. Someone had to drive the world's first nuclear weapon core through the New Mexico desert. If they'd gotten in a car accident, the consequences would have been catastrophic. A tower was built at ground zero. 100 feet tall, the gadget would be hoisted to the top and detonated there. Why a tower? Because we needed to see how the explosion would behave at altitude, similar to how it would be if dropped from a plane. Instruments were set up at various distances to measure the blast. High-speed cameras, seismographs, radiation detectors. We wanted data. Lots of data. Scientists placed bets on the yield. I'm not kidding. There was an actual betting pool. Estimates ranged from 0, meaning complete dud, to 45 kilotons of TNT equivalent. Oppenheimer bet low, something like 300 tons. Edward Teller, always the optimist about destructive power, bet high. Nobody really knew. The day before the test, I barely ate. My stomach was twisted in knots. This was it. Everything came down to this. July 16th, 1945, 5:29 a.m. I was stationed about 10 miles from ground zero at the base camp. There were several observation points at different distances. The closest was about 6 miles away. It was still dark. Pre-dawn. Desert night. We'd been given welding goggles to protect our eyes. The expectation was that the blast would be bright, really bright. I put on the goggles. They made everything look dark green. Then we waited. The countdown started. Someone had a radio. The voice was calm, mechanical. 10 seconds. My heart was pounding. 5 seconds. I held my breath. 3, 2, 1. Nothing. And then everything. First, there was light. Incredible, impossible light. Even through the welding goggles, it was blinding. The entire desert lit up brighter than noon. Brighter than anything I'd ever seen. For a moment, just a moment, there were 2 suns in the sky. I tore off the goggles. Probably stupid, but I couldn't help it. A fireball was rising, expanding. It looked liquid, alive. Colors I didn't have names for. Orange, red, purple. Colors that seemed to shift and flow, and then it mushroomed. The cloud rose and rose, billowing upward. It looked biblical, like the wrath of God made visible. Nobody spoke. Some people cheered. Some prayed. Some cried. I just stood there, frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. And then, about 40 seconds later, the sound arrived. A roar, not just loud, but physical. You could feel it in your chest, in your bones. The ground shook. A hot wind blasted across the desert. It was the sound of the world changing. Later, we'd learned the yield was about 22 kilotons, 22,000 tons of TNT equivalent. all from a ball of plutonium the size of a softball. Oppenheimer would later say he thought of a line from the Bhagavad Gita. Now I'm become death, the destroyer of worlds. Kenneth Bainbridge, the test director, had a simpler response. Now we're all sons of bitches. Both were right. The celebration back at Los Alamos was intense. It worked. The gadget worked. Years of effort, billions of dollars, the combined genius of the greatest minds in physics, it all paid off. We threw parties. People got drunk. Really drunk. The relief was overwhelming. We did it. We actually did it. But underneath the celebration, something else was stirring, something darker. Because now that we knew the bomb worked, now that it was real, we had to face what came next. Would it be used? Some scientists immediately started circulating petitions. Leo Szilard, the physicist who'd originally pushed Einstein to write that letter to Roosevelt, drafted a petition arguing against using the bomb on Japan without warning. 70 scientists signed it. I wasn't one of them, not because I disagreed exactly, but because I was paralyzed. I didn't know what I thought. I didn't know what was right. Here's the argument for using it. Japan was still fighting. Fiercely. The Battle of Okinawa had just ended in June. It was brutal. Thousands of Americans died. Tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers and civilians died. If America invaded Japan, the projections were horrific. Millions of casualties. Japanese, American. The war could drag on for years, but one bomb on a military target, one demonstration of overwhelming force, that might convince Japan to surrender immediately. End the war. Save lives in the long run. That was the logic. The counter-argument, the bomb would kill tens of thousands of civilians instantly, maybe hundreds of thousands, and using it would start a nuclear arms race that could threaten all human civilization. Both arguments made sense. Both were terrifying. The decision wasn't ours to make anyway. That was Truman's call. But we'd built the weapon. We'd made this choice possible. On July 25th, the order was issued. Little Boy, the uranium bomb, would be deployed against Japan as soon as weather permitted. The target list had been narrowed down. Hiroshima, Kokura, Nagasaki, Niigata. Cities chosen because they'd been largely untouched by conventional bombing. That way, we could measure the bomb's effects clearly. That reasoning made me sick. These were real cities. Real people. And we were selecting them based on the fact that they were still intact. I remember walking around Los Alamos after hearing the news. The sky was clear. Stars everywhere. Everything felt surreal. What had we done? August 6th, 1945. The Enola Gay, a B-29 bomber, took off from Tinian Island at 2:45 a.m. On board was Little Boy. At Los Alamos, we waited. Nobody was working. Not really. We were all just waiting for news. At 8:15 a.m., Hiroshima time, the bomb detonated at about 1,900 feet above the city. The explosion was equivalent to about 15 kilotons. Slightly smaller than Trinity, but still enormous. We got the news a few hours later. Successful strike. Target destroyed. People cheered. Again. There was relief. It worked. In combat. Against a real target. But the celebration felt hollow. Wrong somehow, because we didn't know the details yet. We didn't know about the people. Those details came later. Slowly. Hiroshima was a city of about 350,000 people. It had some military facilities, but it was mostly civilian, regular people, families. The bomb exploded above the city center. The fireball was over 1,000 feet across. Everything directly below was vaporized. Just gone. Erased. The shock wave flattened buildings for miles. The heat wave ignited everything flammable. Fires swept through the city. People were burned. Horribly burned. Skin melted. Clothes fused to flesh. People were crushed under collapsing buildings. People were blinded by the flash, and then there was the radiation, invisible, odorless, deadly. People who survived the initial blast started getting sick within days. Their hair fell out. They bled from their gums, their nose, internally. They died slowly, in agony. By the end of 1945, about 140,000 people would be dead. When we heard those numbers, the celebration stopped. Some people at Los Alamos started drinking heavily. Some stopped talking. Some left, just walked away from the whole thing. I felt numb. This was what we'd built. This was the result of all those calculations, all that brilliant physics, all that hard work. 140,000 dead. And then, 3 days later, it happened again. August 9th, 1945. The primary target was Kokura, but weather obscured it. So the bomber, Boxcar, diverted to the secondary target. Nagasaki. Fat Man, the plutonium bomb, the implosion design I'd helped calculate, detonated at 11:02 a.m. local time. Yield about 21 kilotons, larger than Hiroshima. But Nagasaki's terrain meant the destruction was slightly less widespread. The city was in a valley. Hills contained some of the blast. Still, about 74,000 people died by the end of 1945. 74,000, that's a number. But each one was a person. Someone's mother, father, child, friend. I helped kill them. Not directly. I didn't fly the plane. I didn't drop the bomb. But I did the math. I calculated the compression ratios. I helped make Fat Man possible. That knowledge sits with you. It changes you. 5 days after Nagasaki, Japan announced its intention to surrender. August 15th, 1945. VJ Day, victory over Japan. The war was over. We won. At Los Alamos, there was another celebration, but it was different this time. Quieter, more somber. Because we knew the cost. We knew what we'd unleashed. Oppenheimer looked haunted. He'd always been thin, but now he looked skeletal. He'd taken the weight of this on his shoulders more than anyone. He made a speech at Los Alamos after the war ended. I remember him saying that physicists had known sin. That stuck with me. Sin, not error, not mistake. Sin. The months after the war were strange. We were heroes. The newspapers called us the men who ended the war, who saved countless American lives by making an invasion of Japan unnecessary. President Truman awarded medals. Oppenheimer received honors from the government. The Manhattan Project was revealed to the public. Photos of Los Alamos were published. After years of secrecy, suddenly everyone knew what we'd done, and everyone had an opinion. Some people praised us, thanked us, said we'd saved their sons, their husbands from having to invade Japan. Others condemned us, called us murderers, baby killers, said we'd committed a war crime. Both reactions felt too simple. Because here's the truth. It was complicated. It still is. Did the bomb end the war? Yes. Japan surrendered. But would they have surrendered anyway? The Soviet Union had just declared war on Japan. Japan was already devastated by conventional bombing. Some historians argue that the atomic bombs weren't necessary, that Japan was on the verge of surrender regardless. Others argue that the Japanese military was preparing to fight to the last citizen, that an invasion would have been catastrophically bloody. I don't know who's right. I don't think anyone knows for sure. What I do know is that 214,000 people died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Most of them civilians. What I do know is that we introduced nuclear weapons into the world, and now they can never be uninvented. What I do know is that we started an arms race. Within 4 years, the Soviet Union had their own atomic bomb. Then came hydrogen bombs, thousands of times more powerful. Then intercontinental ballistic missiles. By the 1960s, both America and the Soviet Union had enough nuclear weapons to destroy human civilization multiple times over. We created that reality. Some of my colleagues handled it better than others. Feynman seemed to compartmentalize it. He went on to do brilliant work in quantum physics, won the Nobel Prize, lived a full life. Oppenheimer struggled. Publicly, he advocated for international control of nuclear weapons. Privately, he was tormented. In the 1950s, during the McCarthy era, his security clearance was revoked. They accused him of being a communist sympathizer. It destroyed him. Fermi died young of stomach cancer. Some blamed radiation exposure, but there's no way to know. Others left physics entirely, couldn't stomach being associated with weapons research anymore. And me? I went home in late 1945. My wife picked me up at the train station. We hugged. It should have felt joyous, but it was awkward. We'd been apart for over 2 years. We'd changed. She asked what I'd been doing. I told her. Finally. The war was over. The secrecy was lifted. I could talk. I helped build the atomic bomb. She just stared at me. You did what? I explained. Everything. Los Alamos, the calculations, Trinity, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I don't know how to feel about that. Neither do I. Our marriage didn't last. We divorced 2 years later. The war had changed both of us too much. I went back to academia, took a teaching position at a university, taught physics to undergraduates. Some students knew what I'd done. They'd ask questions about the bomb, about Los Alamos, about whether I regretted it. I never had a good answer. Did I regret it? Yes and no. I regretted the deaths, the suffering, the arms race, the world we'd created where human extinction was now possible. But did I regret trying to stop Hitler? No. Did I regret wanting to end the war? No, it's possible to hold both truths at once. Over the years, I watched as nuclear weapons proliferated. Britain got the bomb. France, China, Israel, India, Pakistan, North Korea. Each time I felt a twinge of guilt. We'd opened this door. We'd shown it was possible. I also watched as nuclear weapons never got used again. Not in Korea, not in Vietnam, not in any of the dozens of conflicts since 1945. Why? Mutually assured destruction. Everyone has them. Everyone knows that using them means everyone dies. It's a precarious peace, built on fear, but it's held. So far. I'm old now. Most of my colleagues from Los Alamos are dead. Oppenheimer died in 1967, Fermi in 1954, Feynman in 1988. The young scientists who built the bomb are nearly all gone. Soon, there won't be anyone left who remembers what it was like, who remembers the fear, the excitement, the hope, the horror. That's why I'm telling this story, because I think it's important that people understand, not just the science, but the human element, the choices we made, the consequences we live with. Here's what I want you to know. We weren't monsters. We were human beings trying to do what we thought was right in an impossible situation. We weren't naive. We knew what we were building. We understood the implications. At least, we tried to. We weren't certain. Despite what anyone says, despite the triumphalism or the condemnation, we didn't know we were making the right choice. We still don't know. History is messy, morally ambiguous. There are no simple heroes or villains. There are just people making decisions with incomplete information, under enormous pressure, trying to navigate a world that's more complex than any equation. If there's a lesson from the Manhattan Project, maybe it's this. Science can accomplish incredible things. We can split the atom. We can release unimaginable energy. We can build weapons that reshape geopolitics. But knowing how to do something doesn't mean we should. And once we do it, once we cross certain thresholds, we can't go back. The nuclear genie is out of the bottle. It's not going back in. So what do we do with that? People ask me all the time, if you could go back, Would you do it again? Would you work on the Manhattan Project knowing what you know now? It's an impossible question, because if I say no, I'm saying I would let Hitler potentially develop atomic weapons unopposed. But if I say yes, I'm saying I'm okay with Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Cold War and the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. There is no good answer. But here's what I think after 70 years of living with this. I would try harder to think about the consequences. Not just the immediate goal of ending the war, but what comes after. What world we were creating. I would push harder for international cooperation, for sharing nuclear knowledge to prevent an arms race rather than hiding it and ensuring one. I would listen more to people like Niels Bohr and Leo Szilard who were thinking beyond just winning the war. But would I refuse to work on the bomb entirely? Knowing what Germany was doing, knowing what Japan was doing, no, I don't think I would. And maybe that's the tragedy. Maybe the tragedy is that when faced with an existential threat, we feel we have no choice but to pursue any advantage, any weapon, no matter the long-term cost. Maybe the tragedy is that we're smart enough to build these weapons, but not wise enough to prevent the conditions that make us feel we need them. I don't have answers. Just questions. Questions I've been asking myself for 70 years. So what's the legacy of the Manhattan Project? It's complicated, like everything else about this story. On one hand, the bomb ended World War II. No question. Japan surrendered days after Nagasaki. That was the stated goal, and we achieved it. The bomb also, arguably, prevented World War III. The Cold War never went hot. Why? Because both sides had nuclear weapons. Both sides knew that a full-scale war meant mutual annihilation. Is that a good legacy? A peace maintained by the threat of total destruction? I don't know, but it's the peace we've had. On the other hand, we've lived under the shadow of nuclear weapons for 80 years now. Every generation since 1945 has grown up knowing that human civilization could end in a matter of hours. Children in the 1950s did duck and cover drills as if hiding under a desk would save them from a nuclear blast. We built fallout shelters. We made disaster plans. We mapped out which cities would be hit first. That's the world we created. And the proliferation continues. More countries get the bomb. The technology spreads. Terrorist groups have tried to acquire nuclear materials. The risk hasn't decreased. If anything, it's increased. So when people ask me if it was worth it, I have to say, I don't know. We solved one problem and created another. We ended one war and made future wars potentially apocalyptic. Was that a fair trade? If I've learned anything from my time on the Manhattan Project, it's this. Technology is neutral. It's not good or evil. But the choices we make about how to use it, those choices have moral weight. We chose to build the bomb to stop Hitler. That was, I think, defensible. We chose to use it on Japanese cities. That's harder to defend. We chose to continue building bigger and more destructive weapons. That's harder still. Each choice led to the next. One decision compounded into another. And now we're here, living in a world where 9 countries have nuclear weapons, where thousands of warheads sit in silos and submarines ready to launch. Is that the world we wanted to create? No, but it's the world we created anyway. The other thing I learned is that secrecy breeds problems. The Manhattan Project was necessary during the war, I believe that. But after? The secrecy, the compartmentalization, the refusal to engage with the public about nuclear weapons. That was a mistake. Because these weapons affect everyone. Every person on Earth lives under the threat they pose. Shouldn't everyone have a say in how they're managed? What policies govern their use? Instead, for decades, nuclear policy was decided by a small group of military and political leaders. The rest of the world just had to trust them. That's not democracy. That's not right. If I could change one thing, it would be that. I would make nuclear weapons policy more transparent, more democratic, more open to public debate. Because ultimately, these weapons belong to all of us. Or rather, they threaten all of us. We all deserve a voice. If you're a scientist watching this, if you're someone working on cutting-edge technology, AI, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, whatever comes next, I want to say this. Think about the consequences. Not just the immediate applications. Not just whether something is scientifically possible. Think about what comes after, what world you're creating. Because once you build something, once you prove it's possible, others will follow. The technology will spread, and you can't control how it's used. We learned that the hard way. We built the bomb to stop Hitler, but we couldn't stop the Soviet Union from building their own. Or China. Or anyone else. The knowledge spread, the technology proliferated, and now we live with the consequences. So ask yourself, is what I'm building going to make the world better? Or am I just proving something can be done without thinking about whether it should be done? Be thoughtful. Be ethical. Be willing to say no. Because the world doesn't need more brilliant scientists who can build amazing things. The world needs wise scientists who can determine which things shouldn't be built. I wish I'd been wiser. I'm near the end now. My life, I mean. I've had a long time to think about everything that happened. The Manhattan Project, Los Alamos, Trinity, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the good, the bad, the complicated mess of it all. And here's what I've come to understand. History isn't neat. It's not a story with clear heroes and villains. It's not a simple moral lesson. It's messy. It's contradictory. It's full of people trying their best and sometimes failing in spectacular ways. We were trying to save the world from fascism. We succeeded, but in doing so, we created new threats. New problems. Did we make the right choice? I don't know. I honestly don't. But I do know this. We made a choice. We acted. We took responsibility for trying to shape the world, and now it's your turn. You're inheriting the world we created, for better and worse. You have to decide what to do with it, how to handle nuclear weapons, how to prevent their use, how to maybe, someday, get rid of them entirely. You have to decide how to approach new technologies, how to ensure they're used ethically, how to prevent the next Manhattan Project, whatever form it takes. That's on you now, and I'm sorry we're leaving you with such a difficult inheritance. But I also have faith that your generation and the ones that come after will be wiser than we were. You'll learn from our mistakes. You'll make better choices. At least, I hope so. Because the alternative, a world that destroys itself through its own brilliance, that would be the ultimate tragedy. Don't let it happen. So that's my story. That's what it was like to work on the Manhattan Project. It was exciting and terrifying, brilliant and horrific. The best of humanity and the worst, all wrapped together. And the legacy is still being written. Every day that nuclear weapons exist but aren't used is another day we've survived our own creation. Every day is a choice to do better. I hope we keep making that choice. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for caring about history, about science, about the moral questions that don't have easy answers. And if you take anything away from this video, let it be this. Think about consequences. Think about what world you're creating with your choices, big and small. Because choices matter. Actions have weight. We learned that at Los Alamos. And it's a lesson that never stops being relevant. Hit that like button if this video made you think. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into history and science. And drop a comment below. I'm genuinely curious. If you'd been in my position, what would you have done? Would you have worked on the Manhattan Project? Let me know. Thanks for watching. Stay curious and be wise. See you next time.